I was very fortunate recently to read an article when I was travelling on a plane written by Evan Mitchell, who represents and is a co-founder of the organisation How and Why. They're specialists in Gen Ys, and the content of the article was so interesting, I asked them would they be prepared to come and share some of their ideas with us. And that's the purpose behind today's video, because it appears based on what Evan and Brian are saying that the millennials have some issues, and that as a consequence the organisations who employ them may have some issues. So what we're going to talk about today is what is the impact of that and what might we be able to do about it. So Evan, welcome to Melbourne.
Thank you, it's lovely to be here.
Now, tell us about, I guess, the content of, generally speaking, about what was written in the article that I picked up, and perhaps more broadly, based on your experience.
Okay, well, the fundamental problem, Rosemary, is a generation-wide blind spot when it comes to negotiation and conflict situations in general. Millennials lack what previous generations were able to develop intuitively. That is, an understanding of when to negotiate in order to resolve disputes, and also how to go about that. Millennials are less likely to see disputes as something requiring give and take. They're more likely to double down on their own preferred position, or else to attempt to avoid the conflict, thereby allowing the problem just to fester. And this is becoming increasingly a problem for employers. In the construction industry particularly, where conflicts can be both internal and also involve issues with external parties like subcontractors. It is equally a problem for the millennial employees themselves. There are reams of research indicating this generation to be the most psychologically troubled ever, with record levels of anxiety and depression. Now that is both a cause and an effect of the generational inability to cope with conflict situations.
So Evan, can you help us to understand how these situations come about? What have been the factors, the causes that have contributed to what it is you're saying we're going to experience?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that has to be understood is that it wasn't their fault. Millennials were exposed to a series of societal upheavals as they moved from childhood to maturity. Now, to take just one of those, education for example, there was a significant shift in emphasis away from achievement towards self-esteem. Now that wound up having the opposite to the intended effect. Instead of making millennials more resilient, it wound up making them less so. Now add to that a range of other factors. The peer group echo chamber, accelerated technology, social media, celebrity culture. All of these factors combined to block millennials from developing negotiation instincts. They're more likely to focus on the conflict itself rather than on achieving a mutually beneficial outcome.
You mentioned the transition from achievement to self-esteem. Can you give us an example of how that might play out in daily life so that the audience perhaps understands what you're talking about?
Well, what's often characterised as the all-must-have prizes approach to education, which is finally now being seen for having done the damage that it has done, is probably the single most responsible factor for what is bemoaned as the generational sense of entitlement.
Right. So essentially what we should be doing is helping children, particularly as they move from childhood into adulthood, to understand that they will fail, and that it's about being able to, I guess, cope with that and learn from it in order to develop perhaps greater personal strength.
The education department, the education system has already missed that boat. So I think the onus on organisations these days is actually more important. They have to undo some of that damage that has been already done in order to rein that entitlement in, and in order to ensure that millennial employees see the personal benefits in changing that attitude.
We have a particular interest, obviously, in the construction industry, and you've called this a crisis. How do you see it affecting construction?
Okay, well, let's take a construction-specific example. It's a hypothetical, but realistic and recurring in the industry. A particular project requires a wall to be built. The subcontractor says, that's not in my contract. The millennial site engineer checks and agrees. Now, the site engineer then approaches the project manager or project engineer, but they refuse to budge. The millennial site engineer is now between a rock and a hard place, particularly lacking negotiation instincts and skills. What are they going to do? Are they going to attempt to change their boss's mind? Are they going to tell the subcontractor that's just how it is and lay the blame upstairs? Are they going to do something else? And what is that?
Based on what you've just said, Evan, I can see problems in a number of areas. One for the site engineer, one for the project itself, one for the management of the project, and perhaps even indirectly with the subcontractor. What's your comment about that? Can you see?
Absolutely. There are problems all around. Dispute resolution in these instances is completely at the mercy of a range of interpersonal factors that can very quickly spin out of control. So, given the competing priorities on any project and a millennial employee who's uncomfortable with conflict at the best of times, let alone conflict with an older and more experienced subcontractor, this situation seems destined for ongoing argument and possibly a breakdown into stalemate. Now, from the employee's point of view, it's bad because it set a negative pattern for their future dealings with subcontractors.
I think what you call the deleterious feedback loop.
That's really where the negativity is the case for the organisation itself. From the organisation's viewpoint, at bare minimum, you're looking at a lot of lost time and raw nerves all round. The project itself is likely to have been damaged in terms of timelines and budgets, and that can become a vicious cycle. More tension raised, more disruption flowing on into other project tasks. So in this instance, instead of being able to move forward, the company has actually gone backwards. And it's gone backwards in respect of the three things that are most important to it. Its performance, its people, and its business relationships.
And would it also be fair to say that the more a young engineer is exposed to circumstances that he feels he can't control, he loses more confidence and then perhaps is more reluctant to take on those tasks in the future and perhaps withdraws and reaches inertia? Absolutely.
The impact upon the confidence levels of the millennial employee are exactly the sort of thing that are resulting in employee churn and eventually industry flight, with all of the other cost and disruption ramifications that go along with that.
So, Evan, you've been very articulate in describing the problem. What do you believe are some ways in which we can address the problem?
All right, Rosemary. Well, the fundamental challenge is getting millennial employees to tackle negotiation and conflict situations head on. The answer in this respect is to reshape certain generational viewpoints, those that would be dysfunctional in any workplace. In short, to ensure that millennial employees are able to understand the mindset and the skills that underlie negotiation and dispute resolution. And those, by the way, are also enormously empowering for younger employees.
So I think in our previous conversation you said there are three elements, one of which is the negotiation mindset. It's about developing skills around that, and then also to have a process to follow so that they have, if you like, a roadmap that if they're in a situation where they need to be able to negotiate, that they've got some framework to fall back on.
Absolutely. Well, we see negotiation, the negotiation mindset, negotiation skills, and some understanding of a negotiation process. Now, we really see negotiation as the single best thing that can be done to empower millennial employees in the construction industry and indeed in all industries. This really is a situation in which social benefit, the health and well-being of the employee, and commercial benefit, increased profits, actually go hand in hand.
So, Evan, would you be able to summarise some key messages for the industry?
Certainly, Rosemary. First of all, it's important the industry realises that small investment in dispute resolution for millennial employees will pay off hugely. It'll pay off in terms of the millennial employees' health and well-being. It'll pay off in increased profitability and also as an insurance against costly project disruption. So this really is a situation in which social benefit, the health and well-being of the employee, and commercial benefit, increased profits, go hand in hand.